$1. A life. That was the tale that silenced the whole of Dustville. That winter was colder than any the town had seen. Inside a saloon stinking of smoke and blood, they held an auction for a bride no one wanted. Clara Monroe, just 18, stood trembling before a crowd that jeered and laughed. When the bid sank to $1, everyone figured the game was over. But then came Ezekiel Kane, the cold-blooded bounty hunter, a man whose very name stirred fear across the territories. He laid down one silver coin, $1. He won the auction, and then, instead of claiming his prize, he dropped to one knee before the girl. Why would a man forged in blood choose to bow? Was it mercy or the ghosts of his past? The answer lay on the road ahead, where every drop of blood would buy only the thinnest thread of hope. The wind cut through the dirt streets of Dustville, dragging grit into the smoky glow of the main square's saloon. Inside, lamplight wavered over red-faced drunks and calloused hands, filling the air with heat and cruelty. Tonight wasn't about poker. It wasn't about a shootout. Tonight's game was uglier, an auction for a bride no man would claim. On a rickety platform, a girl was shoved into the light, her hair tangled, her eyes swollen red. Clara Monroe, 18 years old, and already bearing the look of someone twice her age. Her uncle, a broke gambler, barked like he was selling livestock. Starting bid, $1. Laughter burst out, sharp and scornful. $1? I'd rather buy a lame horse. She's got a ruined name, who'd take her home? The room roared with mockery. Clara stood silent, fists clenched, humiliation burning up her throat. Yet behind the tears, her eyes held a stubborn glint, as if daring fate itself to break her. Her uncle yanked her forward, chin jutting. $1! Who'll take the girl for $1? Chairs scraped. The door swung open. A tall man stepped in with the wind. Ezekiel Kane. The name alone hushed half the room. A bounty hunter with a record whispered about in every frontier town. A man whose bullets never missed. Dust clung to the gray scarf masking his jaw. His eyes, cold steel gray, swept the saloon, and men dropped their gazes. Ezekiel didn't bargain, didn't hesitate. He strode to the platform, voice rough but clear. $1. The saloon shook with disbelief. A drunk let out a broken laugh, caught between fear and mockery. Hell, he really bought her for $1? No one dared argue. The auction ended then and there. With a crumpled bill slapped down, Clara Monroe was bound to the deadliest gunman in the territories. No one knew why. To use her, to punish her, to amuse himself. Clara lowered her head, shoulders trembling with terror and despair. But Ezekiel said nothing. Just stood there, shadowed in silence, eyes carrying a weight no one dared name. The jeers faltered. The air thickened, heavy enough to choke, every gaze locked on the bounty hunter, waiting for him to claim his prize like every man in the room expected. Clara held her breath as he stepped forward. His rough hand touched her shaking shoulder, and then he knelt. The saloon froze. A killer, a legend of blood and steel on his knees before a cast-off bride. Ezekiel's voice, husky but firm, cut through the stunned silence. I only paid so no one else could hurt you. The world went quiet. No laughter, no curses. Only the whistle of wind through the doorframe and the flutter of a dying lamp. Clara broke, sobbing, not from shame this time, but from a pain she couldn't name. From the shadows, Someone hissed through yellowed teeth. "That's him! The one who lost his wife and child in the mine massacre!" The words rippled like wildfire. Men dropped their eyes. Others shivered. Behind those iron-gray eyes lay a grief darker than any outlaw's sin. Clara stared into them, saw the agony, but also the unbending steel. Her uncle opened his mouth to protest, but one look from Ezekiel shut him cold. No one spoke. No one dared. Clara Monroe was no longer a cheap lot on the block. She was now bound up in a mystery greater than the room could fathom. Tears streaked her cheeks. Ezekiel rose, dusted off his coat, and wordlessly guided her away. No boasts. No explanations. No chance for questions. Every man left staring after them felt something different. Fear, suspicion, or a stirring they couldn't name. Now tell me, if it were you standing in that room, whose side would you take? A. Clara Monroe, the girl sold for $1. B. Ezekiel Kane, the cold-blooded gunslinger who knelt in sorrow. Or would you choose another path? Leave your mark. Let me know you're still riding with this tale. That night, Clara followed Ezekiel out of Dustville. His black horse trudged through the freezing wind, carrying them along mountain trails swallowed in shadow. Neither spoke. Only the steady thud of hooves on hard ground and the hollow wail of the wind filled the silence. Clara clung behind him, her heart torn, fear, curiosity, and a strange flicker of gratitude for the stranger who had bought her freedom with a single dollar. Hours later, they reached a weathered log cabin tucked deep in the pines. Moonlight silvered the snow on its roof, glinting off cracks in the timber walls. It looked both safe and desolate at once. Ezekiel swung down and pushed the door open. Clara braced for a command, for the harshness she'd come to expect from men. But all he said was, "You can stay, or leave when the sun comes up. The choice is yours." Then he struck a flame. The hearth glowed, firelight chasing back the cold night. Clara curled near the blaze, heart hammering. Ezekiel sat in the corner, cleaning his gun, gray eyes clouded like morning frost. He didn't touch her, didn't even linger his gaze, as if her presence meant nothing at all. Yet in that silence hung a weight, deep and unspoken. When he stepped outside to fetch more wood, Clara's eyes caught on a bundle of old papers on the table, tied with worn leather. Curiosity overcame her. She untied the stack and found letter after letter, unsent, all addressed to the same name, Nathaniel. The handwriting was bold but shaky, smudged where the pen had trembled. "My son, I still haven't found you. If you're alive, forgive your father." Clara's chest tightened. Each page was not just words, but the cry of a broken man. Not random scribbles, but the desperate voice of a father who'd lost everything. Every letter was a scar, proof that beneath Ezekiel's cold steel lay a heart bleeding out in silence. When Ezekiel returned, she hastily set the papers down, pretending to study the fire. But he noticed. His eyes paused, darkened, then softened with grief. Without a word, he gathered the letters back up, bundling them with care, as if cradling the last breath of a ghost. Clara froze. For the first time, she saw the truth. The man who had knelt before her was not moved by pity alone, but by a grief too vast for the world to understand. In the flicker of the flames, Ezekiel's scarred, weathered face was no longer just the mask of a merciless hunter, but the visage of a survivor, burdened with endless loss. Outside, the storm raged. Snow whirled, Wind screamed through the trees. Inside, Clara huddled by the fire while Ezekiel oiled his gun, always ready, always watchful. The world seemed reduced to just the two of them, until a sound broke through. Knock. Knock. Clara jolted, wide-eyed. Ezekiel rose in an instant, hand resting on the gun at his hip. No soul should be wandering in a blizzard at this hour. The knock came again, weaker, pleading. Ezekiel motioned for silence, then cracked the door. A small figure collapsed inside. A boy, thin, ragged, lips blue with cold. His eyes, wide with terror and need, held no words. The child was mute. Clara rushed forward, wrapping him in a heavy blanket, pulling him close to the fire. He shook uncontrollably, clutching a leather cord around his neck. Dangling from it was a worn brass key. Her breath caught. It was the same key Ezekiel always carried. She looked up and saw his face shatter. The mask of stone cracked into horror, and something like hope. Ezekiel dropped to his knees before the child. His calloused hands trembled, afraid to touch. His voice rasped, breaking. "Nathaniel?" The boy lifted his gaze, suspicion softening. He reached into his tattered coat, pulled out a slate and a stub of chalk. His hand shook as he wrote a single word. "Father." Clara went still. Ezekiel froze, then let out a sound torn between laughter and sob. He pulled the boy into his arms, clutching him as if letting go would make him vanish into the storm. Nathaniel, the son Ezekiel thought dead in the mine massacre 3 years past, was alive. The fire roared brighter, casting the three of them in its glow. Their fates bound, together now by pain and providence. Clara watched, tears welling. Outside, the storm screamed. Inside, a broken family was reborn, and she knew her life had crossed into a chapter she could never turn back from. No longer just a girl sold for $1. She was witness to a resurrection. Now tell me, if you were standing in that cabin, whose side would you choose? A. Clara Monroe. The girl swept into a secret not her own. B. Ezekiel Kane. The father who thought he'd lost everything, now clutching blood of his blood, or would you choose another? Leave your answer. Let me know you're still riding with this tale. Morning light crept through the cracks of the cabin, spilling across the boy's young face where dried tears still clung to his cheeks. Nathaniel sat curled near the fire, clutching his little slate as though it were the only rope tying him to the world. Clara sat beside him, gently offering a nub of chalk. "You can write whatever you need to say," she whispered. Nathaniel hesitated, eyes darting toward Ezekiel, his father, standing rigid at the window, back carved from stone. Then the boy lowered his head and scratched shaky words across the slate. "Mother didn't die of sickness." Clara froze, breath catching as the chalk squeaked out another jagged line. Nathaniel's eyes brimmed red as he wrote again, each stroke carving deeper into the air. She was killed because she saw them kill Jacob. Clara's hands trembled. The name Jacob echoed in her memory, whispers she'd once heard in town. Jacob, Emily's brother, the man who dared defy the mining company that ruled the valley. Ezekiel spun around. His gray eyes flared like hot coals. He dropped to his knees in front of his son, gripping his shoulders. "You're certain, Nathaniel? You saw—" The boy's small hands shook as he wrote. "I hid in the mine. I saw them push Jacob down, heard the gun, then, Mother." The last word scrawled slow, broken, smudged with falling tears. Clara pressed a hand to her mouth, heart twisting. The truth tore open like an old wound. Emily, the gentle woman who once lulled her child with the violin, hadn't faded from illness at all. She'd been silenced for witnessing blood spilled in the dark. The mining company, the name that shadowed every life in the region. They had slaughtered Jacob to hush his accusations about the cave-in that buried dozens of men. And when Emily saw, they buried her too. Ezekiel sat motionless, fists whitening. His eyes blazed now, stripped of the cold calm he wore like armor. His voice came low, rough, shaking with fury. They murdered your mother, and I believed their lies for 3 damn years. The cabin seemed to tremble with his rage. Nathaniel shrank against Clara, trembling under the weight of memory. She held him close, whispering, "You survived to tell it. You've done the one thing they feared most." Outside, the wind howled like the land itself was mourning. By the fire's glow, Ezekiel knew the fight ahead wasn't his alone. It was blood debt, family debt, and the truth would not stay buried. Silence pressed heavy. Nathaniel leaned into Clara, clutching the slate like a fragile shield. Ezekiel stood near the door, shoulders shaking under the storm within him. Clara lowered her gaze, the boy's words burning into her mind. Mother was killed because she saw them kill Jacob. A memory flared. Her uncle, the gambler, slipping a fat envelope from a man in a leather coat stamped with the mining company's mark. She had been too young to grasp it. Now the pieces locked together like iron. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "My uncle. I saw him take their money." Ezekiel's head snapped toward her, eyes like drawn steel. Clara trembled, but forced herself to continue. "He was drowning in debt. One day he took the cash and told me to keep quiet. I didn't understand then. But now I do. He was their hand. And when they needed someone to sell, he gave them me, just to pay his dues." Nathaniel lifted his slate, chalk scratching with hesitant strokes. He was there, the night Jacob died. The cabin collapsed into silence. Clara went cold, though the fire roared bright. Her last kin, her own blood, was no family at all, but a Judas who'd betrayed not just her, but Emily and Jacob too. Ezekiel's jaw clenched, voice like iron striking steel. "The company owns this whole town, bought every soul they could. But now we hold the one thing they can't bury." His eyes locked on Nathaniel, burning not just with sorrow, but with a glint of purpose. "A living witness, my son, and his words will bring their empire of blood to the ground." Clara gripped her hand tight, heart burning with grief and fury. In that moment she knew she was no longer a bystander. Jacob's blood, Emily's tears, her uncle's betrayal, they had all dragged her into this war. Outside, the storm screamed louder, warning of tempests yet to come. But inside that cabin, 3 broken souls, one gunslinger hollowed by loss, one girl once sold for $1, and one mute boy holding the truth, stood bound together as the single arrow that might pierce the veil of lies smothering their land. Now tell me, if you were in that cabin, whose side would you choose? Clara Monroe, the girl who dares face the cruel truth of her own bloodline. Ezekiel Kane, the father who lost everything, now staring down justice through fire and blood. Or would you choose another? Leave your mark, let me know you're still riding with this tale. Night fell heavy. Darkness thick as a shroud draped over the cabin hidden deep in the woods. Clara had barely drifted near the hearth when a strange sound split the silence, the pounding of hooves, followed by shrill voices cutting the night. Ezekiel was on his feet in an instant, his gray eyes flashing in the firelight. "They've found us," he growled, low and sure. Without another word, he doused the lamp, dragging Clara and Nathaniel toward the back door. But the bullets came first. Bang! Bang! Splinters of wood exploded from the walls, smoke and lead filling the air with death. "Cole Webster." Ezekiel's jaw clenched around the name. Webster, another bounty man, ruthless as winter, the kind who'd shoot his own employer if it meant more gold in his pocket. And now he had a band of hired guns with him, circling the cabin like wolves. "Come out, Kane!" Webster's voice cracked through the wind. "Hand over the boy, and I'll give you a quick death." Nathaniel trembled against Clara's dress, eyes wide with terror. Clara's chest locked tight, but Ezekiel's hand, rough, steady, pressed down on her shoulder. "We don't get caught. Stay with me." From a corner of the cabin, he pulled a worn leather satchel, oil lamp, dried rations, coils of rope, and a spare pistol, all laid ready as though he'd been waiting for this very night. Another volley shredded the walls. Ezekiel kicked open the back, forcing them into the storm. The wind bit their faces, snow blinding, but Ezekiel moved with certainty. He veered off the main road. No fool would run into a trap that obvious, and cut toward the jagged ridges beyond. Behind them, shouts and hoofbeats gave chase. Webster's men, dark shapes with rifles sparking in the night, gained on them like hunting dogs. Clara's breath burned, her heart racing, but she clung to Nathaniel's hand, refusing to let go. At last, after what felt like an eternity, they reached the yawning mouth of an abandoned mine. Its entrance sagged, half-choked with weeds and fallen stone. Ezekiel shoved them inside and rolled a boulder across part of the opening. The dark swallowed them whole. The air smelled of mold and coal dust. Clara's pulse hammered in her ears as Nathaniel shook in her arms. Ezekiel lit the oil lamp, its dim glow spilling across rotting beams and timbers that creaked like ghosts. "They'll comb the woods," Ezekiel muttered, his eyes hard as steel. "But I've kept this place ready. Here we stand a chance." Clara looked at him then, truly looked, and realized every step, every plan he made was born of years of blood and loss. And tonight, that bitter caution had saved their lives. Outside, Webster's men still howled and searched, but here in the mine, the flicker of lamplight offered them the faintest hope. The silence grew thick. Clara sat clutching Nathaniel close, feeling his heart pound against hers. Ezekiel leaned against the rock wall, eyes locked on the flame, his face carved in shadow and scar. At last he spoke, his voice raw. "I can't keep running." Clara lifted her head. Firelight cut deep into the weary lines of his face. Beneath the hardness lay the exhaustion of a man who had carried too much loss. "They won't stop, Clara," he continued, voice rumbling like the storm outside. "Webster, the company, all of them. They'll hunt until Nathaniel's gone from this earth. There's only one road left. Helena." His eyes flared, sharp with resolve. "Hollister's there, the only judge with the guts to stand against them. If Nathaniel writes the truth, his testimony will bring that empire to its knees." Clara's chest ached. Since the day she was sold for a single dollar, she had thought her life belonged to shadows. But looking into Ezekiel's fire-lit eyes, she saw it clear. This wasn't just a father and son's flight. This was war. Her hand found his, trembling but certain. "From the moment you knelt instead of taking me, this became my fight too." For the first time, the storm in Ezekiel's gaze broke, replaced by something gentler, the flicker of a man who had found an ally worth trusting. Nathaniel lifted his slate, chalk trembling in his fingers. Slowly, he wrote, "Together." Clara's throat closed as she pulled him against her. Ezekiel's scarred hand rested heavy on his son's shoulder. In the dark of the mine, with death circling outside, 3 souls were bound by one invisible thread: pain, belief, and the fierce hope of justice reborn. Beyond the walls, Webster's shouts still echoed, the hunt far from over. But here, Clara knew they had crossed a line. No more running. From this night forward, they would face the fire head-on. Now tell me, if you were with them, whose side would you choose? Ace. Clara Monroe. The girl once frail, now choosing to walk into the fire. B. Ezekiel Kane, the father daring to defy an empire for his bloodline. Or would you stand somewhere else? Leave your answer. Let me know you're still riding with this tale. A gray dawn spread over the barren mountains. The wind sighed through dead branches, creaking like the ghosts of a land bled dry of hope. Ezekiel led the way, Clara steadying Nathaniel as they trudged across loose stone and shale. The boy was tougher than his frail frame suggested, but each step weighed heavy, his lips pale with exhaustion and cold. By nightfall, they reached a shack tucked beneath a cliff face. Smoke curling from the chimney betrayed the place was not abandoned. Ezekiel murmured, "Old Jeremiah, once a hunter of renown, now just a man hollowed out by hate." "Hate?" Clara asked, surprised. Ezekiel nodded, eyes shadowed. His son was one of the men killed in the mine collapse 3 years ago, the disaster the company buried with lies. Jeremiah's lived in exile since, hating everything tied to them. He rapped on the door. A rifle barrel pushed through the crack before the door creaked. A rasping voice growled, "Get lost. I don't take guests." "It's Kane," Ezekiel replied, steady as stone. "I need shelter for the night." The door opened a sliver. A weathered face appeared, beard and hair white as snow, eyes sharp and hard with grief. Jeremiah's gaze swept past Ezekiel and froze on Clara and the Pahot boy. Distrust flickered there. "You bring a woman and a child? You think I run a charity?" Clara shuddered, clutching Nathaniel tighter. Ezekiel's voice stayed even. "No, we just need a roof, nothing more." Jeremiah scoffed and started to slam the door. But Nathaniel stepped forward. His small hand shook as he raised his slate, scrawling a single word: "Father." Then he gripped Ezekiel's arm, eyes glowing with trust. The sight struck Jeremiah like a blade. His hand faltered. For a heartbeat, the ghost of his lost son flickered in his dim eyes. All his years of silence and bitterness clogged in his throat. The rifle dipped. His voice cracked. "Get in, before I change my mind." Clara exhaled, guiding Nathaniel inside. Ezekiel bowed his head, but between the two men passed a silent understanding. One who had lost a son, and one who had just found his again. The cabin smelled of smoke and damp wood. Jeremiah lit a small fire. The flames painted his lined face, his red-rimmed eyes betraying what he tried to hide. Clara realized then, sometimes, it is shared pain alone that binds strangers into allies. Night deepened, the shack glowing with the fire's restless light. Clara sat by Nathaniel, wrapping him warmer, while outside the wind wailed. Ezekiel and Jeremiah sat opposite each other, silent as carved stone, broken only by the crack of burning logs. At last, Jeremiah rose. Slowly, he crossed to an old chest in the corner. Kneeling, his hands trembled as if touching ghosts. From it, he drew a bundle wrapped in black oilcloth. He peeled it back, and cold steel gleamed, a Sharp's rifle, long-barreled, polished like it still breathed war. Clara held her breath. Ezekiel's eyes narrowed. Jeremiah's face twisted, eyes burning as he cradled the weapon. I kept it for the day of reckoning, but that day may not belong to me anymore. He stood and offered it to Ezekiel, both hands steady, like passing down his very life. Now it's yours. Your hand is strong, and your eyes still sharp as steel. This is your chance to do what I could not. Ezekiel took the rifle, its weight heavy with promise. No words of thanks, only a nod, his gaze meeting Jeremiah's. Two men, bound by grief, speaking in silence. Jeremiah sank back into his chair, poured himself a chipped cup of whiskey, and rasped. The company's put a price on the boy. $100 for his head. Clara froze. $100. A fortune that would turn friends to traitors, neighbors to hunters, even men who owed Cain their lives into killers. She tightened her hold on Nathaniel, heart pounding to shatter. Jeremiah stared into the flames, voice bitter as ash. For that kind of money, no place is safe. Not here, not anywhere. You know this, Cain. Ezekiel laid the Sharp's rifle across the table, his hand running over its barrel. His gray eyes were still, but Clara saw the storm rising inside. His voice was low, carved from iron. Then all the more reason to get Nathaniel to Helena. Let his truth ring out where they can't silence it. $100 won't buy justice. Clara's eyes glistened. She clasped Nathaniel's hand, her voice steady, though her body shook. If the world turns against you, I'll still stand here. This fight is mine too. Jeremiah stared long into the fire. For the first time in years, a rough laugh tore out of his chest, hoarse but warm. Maybe the blood spilled under those mines wasn't wasted, not if there are still those who'll rise. Now tell me, if you stood in that shack, whose side would you take? Ezekiel Cain, the father shouldering vengeance and a rifle of reckoning. B. Clara Monroe, the once fragile girl who chose to step into the fire beside him, or would you stand elsewhere? Leave your mark. Let me know you're still riding with this tale. The blizzard swallowed the mountains, sky and earth blurred into a white abyss. The wind howled like starving wolves, lashing skin raw, making every step toward Helena feel like dragging chains of stone. Ezekiel led the way, cloak heavy with snow, each stride steady, though weariness dragged at him. Behind, Clara held Nathaniel tight against her chest, feeling each shivering breath rattle in the boy's frail body. By nightfall, they stumbled upon an abandoned cabin on the valley's edge. Its door groaned as Ezekiel forced it open, revealing nothing but bare timbers, a cracked hearth, and the stale rot of old wood. Yet compared to the storm outside, it was a blessing. Ezekiel lit a fire, the glow washing their pale faces in amber. Clara wrapped Nathaniel in a blanket and pulled him close. He shut his eyes, but sleep came uneasy, his small frame quaking with memories of pursuit. Clara stroked his tangled hair, her voice trembling into a lullaby. Sleep now, Nathaniel. Rest, little one. The morning will come. The tune was simple, fragile, yet warmer than anything the boy had known in years. His shoulders eased. In his drifting half-dream, his small fingers lifted, moving in the air as if drawing a bow across unseen strings. Clara froze, tears spilling before she could stop them. He could not speak, but she understood. Nathaniel was remembering his mother, the woman who once lulled him with the violin. Now only a memory remained. Ezekiel sat still, eyes locked on his son. Those little hands playing a ghostly song cracked the armor he'd worn for years. For the first time, his gray eyes softened, torn between grief and fragile hope. Clara caught that look, in the ruin of the old cabin, with the storm shrieking outside. She knew they were bound together now, not just by duty, but by the aching desire to rebuild the home the world had stolen from them. Nathaniel drifted to sleep, hands still twitching, as if finishing the melody in dreams. Clara kissed his brow and whispered, "You will be safe, no matter what. We will protect you." Ezekiel's fists clenched. Outside, the storm raged on, but within those walls another fire had kindled, the fire of family, of belief, of a fragile hope burning against the dark. Dawn broke red after the storm. The sun rose bloody from the mountains, light spilling across a land buried in snow. Clara rode with Nathaniel before her on the saddle, while Ezekiel led at the front, the Sharp's rifle gleaming across his shoulder. The air was crisp, but strung tight as a wire. Helena lay ahead, city of justice and of ambush. The road curled toward the outskirts, too quiet. No voices, no hooves, only black crows wheeling through a gray sky. Clara shivered. Strange, too still. Ezekiel pulled the reins, dismounted, and crouched low. Tracks scarred the snow, heavy, many, heading out from Helena. His voice came rough, unshakable. "Webster, he's already there." Clara's pulse slammed. "You mean, they're not waiting in the woods," Ezekiel said, steel flashing in his eyes. "They've laid the trap in the city itself, around the courthouse, around Hollister. They mean to turn justice into a blood snare." Nathaniel's hand shook as he scrawled on his slate. "What do we do?" Ezekiel looked down at his son, and for once he wasn't just the cold hunter, but a father at the crossroads of fate. He laid a calloused hand on Nathaniel's shoulder, voice low, each word heavy as iron on stone. "We don't run. We face them. For justice, for you, for us." Clara's heart twisted, but she didn't falter. She remembered the night Ezekiel knelt instead of taking her, remembered every mile of blood and snow they'd endured. This man, this boy, they were her family now. She gripped her reins, her eyes wet but resolute. "If it's a trap, then I walk into it with you. I chose this road long ago." Ezekiel met her gaze, then his son's. In the red dawn, 3 souls stood against an empire's shadow. A gunslinger scarred by loss, a girl who defied her fate, and a mute boy carrying the truth. Together, they turned their faces toward Helena, where destiny waited. Far away, the church bells of Helena tolled, heavy and unrelenting, like war drums calling them forward. Clara tightened her arms around Nathaniel. Ezekiel adjusted the rifle on his shoulder, gray eyes set on the courthouse rising faint in the mist. There was no turning back. The road of blood and hope led one way only, into Helena. The dawn over Helena was more than a new day. It was the threshold of fate. A gunslinger who had lost everything, a girl who chose to stand in fire, and a mute child who held the truth. Could they withstand the empire that hunted them? This tale reminds us, strength doesn't lie in gold or guns alone, but in courage, in love, and in the will to stand when all else says run. And you, if you stood at that gate of Helena, would you flee into the hills or walk forward to face the storm? Hit like, subscribe, and ring the bell to keep riding with this story of the wild West, where tragedy and hope walk hand in hand.